3 days after I bought that old cabin, my family showed up unannounced in the middle of a storm. Why were they here after laughing at me for buying it? Why did my father keep staring at the floor like he was looking for something hidden? And why was my brother holding a contract I had never seen before? I hadn't told them about what I found under the floorboards. Not the sealed envelope, not the map, not the name scribbled in the margin my father's. "Riley," Ethan said, dropping the paperwork onto my table. "You need to sign this tonight." That's when I realized this cabin was never just a cabin. If you're watching from somewhere else, tell me where you are and what time it is there. I'm curious who's here with me right now, and if stories like this pull you in the way they pulled me in, you can stick around. 2 weeks before my family showed up at my door like they owned the place, I was sitting at my desk in downtown Denver, staring at a contract that didn't make sense. That was my job, finding what didn't make sense. I worked as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized legal firm. Most of what I did involved tracing money trails, identifying irregularities in asset transfers, and helping attorneys build cases when something felt off but couldn't yet be proven. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't the kind of job my family bragged about. According to my father, Marcus Robinson, I overanalyzed simple things. According to my brother, Ethan, I hid behind paperwork instead of building real wealth. And according to my mother, Elaine, I just worried too much. That was the general consensus. That afternoon, I had just wrapped up a dispute involving mineral rights in northern Wyoming, ironically enough when a listing popped up in my email. It came from a subscription I had almost forgotten about distressed properties under market value. Normally, I skimmed those emails and moved on, but this one made me pause. A small cabin in the Colorado mountains, isolated, structurally sound but outdated. Sold as is. Price far below comparable properties in the area. That kind of gap usually meant one thing: there was something wrong with it. I opened the listing. The photos weren't staged. No filters, just raw images of a weathered structure surrounded by tall pine trees and silence. The interior looked worn but intact. No visible damage, no obvious red flags. That made it worse. When a property is that underpriced without a clear reason, the issue is usually buried deeper legal complications, ownership disputes, or unresolved claims attached to the land itself. That should have been enough to make me close the tab. Instead, I requested the documents. Sandra Lee, the listing agent, called me later that afternoon. Her tone was polite, but there was a hesitation underneath it. "You're serious about this property?" she asked. "I don't commit to anything without reading the paperwork first," I said. There was a brief pause. "I can send you the full deed packet," she replied. "Just make sure you go through all of it." The way she said all of it wasn't casual. It sounded like a warning. That night, I printed everything out and spread the documents across my dining table. Deed history, prior ownership transfers, tax records, a few addendums that looked older than the rest. The previous owner's name appeared repeatedly: Harold Bennett. No immediate red flags, at least not the obvious kind. No liens, no foreclosure filings, no active disputes listed in the standard registry, but there were gaps. Certain years where documentation felt thin. Transfers that should have required more accompanying records, references to attachments that weren't included in the main packet. Nothing illegal, just incomplete. And incomplete paperwork is where problems tend to hide. I should have flagged it and walked away. Instead, I scheduled a viewing. The following evening, I drove up to see the cabin in person. The air changed the moment I left the highway, quieter, heavier, like the world had decided to step back and leave that place alone. Sandra met me outside. "You came alone?" she asked, almost surprised. "I prefer it that way," I said. She gave a small nod like that confirmed something for her. The cabin looked exactly like the photos. No surprises, which again wasn't comforting. Inside, everything felt preserved. Not abandoned, not neglected, just left behind, like someone had walked out and decided not to come back. We walked through each room in silence. I noticed details most buyers wouldn't: slight inconsistencies in floor alignment, sections of wood that had been removed and reinstalled, small differences in wear patterns. Nothing you could point to and call a problem, but enough to make me pay attention. "Do you know why it's priced this low?" I asked. Sandra hesitated. "The owner passed away," she said. "No direct heirs. The estate handled the sale quickly. That explained speed, not the price." "Was there any legal dispute?" I asked. "Nothing currently active," she replied carefully. "Currently." That word mattered. We finished the tour outside. The trees blocked most of the light even in the late afternoon. It felt private in a way that wasn't entirely comforting. I looked at the cabin again, then at the paperwork in my hands, then back at the cabin. "I'll take it," I said. Sandra didn't smile the way agents usually do when they close a deal. Instead, she studied me for a second longer than expected. Then she said quietly, "Just make sure you read every attachment in the deed packet. Not review, not skim. Read every attachment." I signed the initial paperwork the next morning. That evening, I told my family. We were sitting around my parents' dining table, Marcus at the head of lane beside him, Ethan across from me, Chloe scrolling through her phone like she always did when something didn't involve her directly. "I bought a cabin," I said. Chloe didn't look up. What a cabin?" "In the mountains. About 2 hours from here." Ethan laughed first. Not surprised, not curious, just amused. "You," he said. "Buying property out there?" "That's not investing, Riley. That's hiding. It's not meant to be an investment," I replied. "It's mine." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me the way he always did when he thought I was making a mistake. "How much?" he asked. I told him. That's when Elaine frowned. "That's too low," she said. "There has to be something wrong with it." "There probably is," I said calmly. "I'm aware." Ethan shook his head. "So you knowingly bought a problem. I bought something I understand how to evaluate. That's not the same thing." Chloe finally looked up just long enough to add, "Sounds like a horror movie setup." Nobody asked where it was exactly. Nobody asked why I wanted it. They just dismissed it, like they always did. Marcus tapped the table once, then said, "Well, when it turns into a financial mess, don't expect us to fix it." I met his gaze. "I didn't ask you to." That ended the conversation, or at least I thought it did. 3 days later, I was standing in that cabin holding a piece of paper I wasn't supposed to find when the knocking started, and the sound of it told me something immediately. They weren't here to visit. They were here because I had already found something they needed. The first night in the cabin was quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just quiet in a way that made every small sound feel deliberate. I set my bags down near the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment listening. The wind pressed softly against the windows, and somewhere deeper in the woods, branches shifted like something unseen was moving through them. It wasn't unsettling enough to leave, but it wasn't comfortable either. I told myself it was just unfamiliar. That's the thing about new places. They always feel like they're watching you back, I walked through each room again slower this time. Not as a buyer, but as someone who needed to understand what she now owned. The structure was solid. The foundation didn't show any visible cracking. The roof had been patched, but not recently. Electrical lines had been updated within the last decade. On paper, everything checked out. In person, it felt like something had been interrupted. The living room floor caught my attention first. At a glance, it looked normal, aged wood slightly uneven from years of settling. But when I stepped across it, there was a subtle difference in sound. One section near the old stone fireplace gave off a duller tone. Not hollow, just inconsistent. I crouched down, pressing my palm against the wood. The grain pattern didn't match the surrounding planks. It had been replaced at some point, but whoever did it hadn't bothered to blend it perfectly. That wasn't unusual in older properties. What was unusual was how carefully the nails had been set almost flush, almost invisible. Careful work usually means something is meant to stay hidden. I stood up and stepped back. Not yet, I told myself. If there was something under there, it wasn't going anywhere. I moved on. The rest of the cabin was sparse. A few pieces of furniture had been left behind: a worn armchair, a narrow table by the window, a set of shelves that held nothing but dust. No personal items, no photographs, no traces of the person who had lived there for years. That absence felt intentional, as if Harold Bennett had removed everything that could explain him. By late afternoon, I stepped outside to get a better look at the property line. The trees were dense but not impenetrable. There was a faint path leading away from the cabin, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. I followed it for a few minutes before hearing a voice behind me. "You must be the new owner." I turned. The man standing a few yards away looked like he had been part of this place longer than the cabin itself. Late 60s, maybe older. Weathered face, steady posture. He didn't step closer, just waited. "Riley Robinson," I said. "You live nearby." He nodded. "Thomas Holloway. Been here about 30 years. I glanced back toward the cabin. "Then you probably knew the previous owner." A brief pause. "Harold kept to himself," he said. "Didn't trust many people. That's what I've heard." Mr. Holloway studied me for a moment, then asked, "Did they tell you why he sold?" "He passed away," I said. "Estate handled it." "That's the official version." Something in his tone made me hold my ground. "And the unofficial one?" I asked. He looked past me toward the cabin. Harold believed someone was trying to take something from him, he said. Something tied to the land. I felt a quiet shift in my chest. Did he ever say what I asked? "No," Mr. Holloway replied, but he started locking things up, stopped letting people inside, even turned down offers that didn't make sense to refuse. What kind of offers? High ones. That didn't fit the price I had paid. Did he ever mention who was making them? I asked. Mr. Holloway shook his head. "No names. Just said they weren't done asking." The wind picked up slightly, moving through the trees in a low, steady rhythm. "People come out here for different reasons," he added. "Some for quiet, some for what's underneath." I didn't respond right away, because that last part wasn't casual conversation. It was a warning. "Thank you," I said finally. He gave a small nod, then turned and walked back the way he had come, disappearing into the trees with the kind of ease that only comes from familiarity. I stood there for another minute before heading back inside. The cabin felt different now, not more dangerous, just more specific, like it had a purpose I hadn't fully understood yet. I walked straight to the living room and stood over the section of flooring again. The late afternoon light hit it at an angle now, making the difference in color more obvious. Someone had replaced that piece recently enough for it to stand out, but not recently enough to leave fresh marks. That meant it had been done carefully, deliberately. I went to my car and grabbed the small toolkit I kept in the trunk. Nothing extensive, just enough for minor repairs. Back inside, I knelt beside the fireplace and ran my fingers along the edge of the plank. There was a slight gap barely visible, but enough. I slid the flat end of the tool into it and applied gentle pressure. The wood didn't move at first. Then with a quiet shift, it lifted. Not nailed down. Set in place. That confirmed it. This wasn't repair work. It was concealment. I paused just long enough to consider whether I actually wanted to know what was underneath. Because once I opened it, there was no going back to thinking of this place as just a cheap cabin I had impulsively bought. But I didn't come here to avoid answers. I came here because I knew how to find them. I lifted the plank the rest of the way and set it aside. Underneath there was a narrow cavity lined, protected from moisture, and inside it, a sealed envelope, thick, reinforced, labeled in handwriting that had faded but not disappeared. My name wasn't on it. No name was. Just a date. And a note scribbled in the corner. If you're not him, read this carefully. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I stared at it, feeling something settle into place in a way that made everything else sharper. The price, the gaps in the documents, Sandra's warning, Mr. Holloway's story. This wasn't random. It had been left for someone, and somehow it had ended up with me. I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than it should have been, which meant it wasn't just paper inside. And as I turned it over, I noticed something else, a second layer sealed beneath the first, reinforced separately, deliberate. Whatever was in there wasn't meant to be found easily, and definitely not meant to be misunderstood. I stood up slowly, the envelope still in my hands, because at that moment I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The reason my family had laughed when I bought this place was because they thought I'd never find this. I didn't open the envelope right away. That probably sounds strange considering everything I'd already uncovered. But I've learned something from my work when information has been hidden, that carefully the worst thing you can do is rush into it without context. So I set it on the table. Then I made coffee. It wasn't about the coffee. It was about slowing my mind down enough to process what I already knew before adding something new. By the time I sat back down, the cabin felt different again. Not quieter, more focused. Like everything in it had narrowed down to that envelope. I ran my fingers along the edges. The outer seal had been reinforced with a thin strip of wax that had hardened unevenly. Not professional, personal. Whoever sealed it had done so with intention, not formality. I carefully sliced through it with the edge of a small blade. Inside there were 3 items: a folded set of documents, a smaller inner envelope heavier sealed separately, and a handwritten letter. I reached for the letter first. The handwriting was uneven, like it had been written quickly but with purpose. If you're reading this, then I wasn't able to stop them. I paused. Not the kind of opening line you expect in a routine property transfer. I don't know who you are, but I know who they are, and I know they won't stop looking until they get what's under this land. The words tightened something in my chest. I refused every offer they made, not because of the money, but because of what they tried to hide in the paperwork. They thought I didn't understand it. They were wrong. That part I understood. People underestimate what they don't think looks powerful. They'll come with contracts, They'll make it sound fair. It won't be. Read everything, especially what they don't point out. I exhaled slowly because that wasn't a warning. That was a pattern I recognized. The letter ended with a single line underlined twice. Ownership isn't just what's on the surface. I set the letter down and unfolded the documents. At first glance, they looked like standard land agreements, survey maps, boundary descriptions, mineral rights clauses. But as I moved through them, the inconsistencies started to stand out. Not errors, manipulations. Sections that had been copied from older contracts, but altered in subtle ways. References to rights that had been temporarily assigned but never formally transferred back. Language that blurred the line between ownership and access. It was complicated but not unfamiliar. Whoever had drafted those documents knew exactly how to make something look complete while leaving just enough ambiguity to exploit later. And then I saw it. A marginal note, handwritten not part of the original print. A name. Marcus Robinson. My father. I stared at it longer than I should have. Because there are two kinds of coincidences in legal work. The kind you investigate, and the kind you don't ignore. This wasn't something I could ignore. I flipped through the rest of the pages faster now, looking for anything that connected that name to the agreements. There were traces. Not direct signatures, but references, consultations, preliminary offers, draft negotiations that never finalized. Marcus had been involved, not as an owner, but as someone trying to become one. I leaned back in my chair, the document still in my hands, trying to fit this version of him, the one in these papers, with the one who had sat across from me at dinner and told me I didn't understand what I was doing. It didn't match. Or maybe it matched too well, because if he had tried and failed to secure whatever was tied to this land, then my purchase wasn't just overlooked. It was inconvenient. I looked at the second envelope. Smaller, heavier, sealed with more care than the first. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside there was a folded map, and something else. A metallic object small enough to fit in my palm. I unfolded the map first. It was a geological survey, detailed, layered with markings that indicated mineral density beneath the surface. Certain areas were circled, annotated with figures that had been crossed out and rewritten. Even without running a full valuation, I could tell this wasn't insignificant. It wasn't oil, but it wasn't nothing either. Then I picked up the metal object. A key. Old worn but not rusted through. Attached to it was a tag with a number. No label, no explanation. Just a number. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the weight of it. Because keys only matter when there's something worth locking. And based on everything I just read, this wasn't just about land. It was about control over what the land could become. I went back to the documents one more time, slower now. That's when I found the clause, buried in a section most people would skim past. A conditional transfer of subsurface rights. Still active, still enforceable, and tied directly to the current owner of the surface property. Me. I set the papers down carefully, because in that moment the situation clarified in a way that made everything else fall into place. My father hadn't failed because the opportunity didn't exist. He had failed because he didn't control the property. Now I did. And if the clause held up, and I had every reason to believe it would, then I wasn't just the owner of a cabin in the mountains. I was the only person with a legitimate claim to something far more valuable underneath it. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the trees. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watched. Not in a physical sense, but in a way that meant attention had already shifted toward this place. Toward me. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. But that didn't mean they didn't know. People who operate through paperwork don't need to call you to track what you've done. They just wait until it matters. I turned back to the table. The letter. The documents. The map. The key. All of it laid out in front of me like pieces of something that had been set in motion long before I ever saw that listing. And then I heard it. A knock. Sharp. Immediate. Not hesitant. Not a visitor's knock. I didn't need to look at the time. Because I already knew. They hadn't come early. They had come exactly when they needed to. And as I walked toward the door, one thought stayed clear in my mind. They weren't here to ask what I found. They were here to make sure I didn't keep it. I didn't open the door right away. That was the first decision I made on instinct, and the first one that mattered. Instead, I stepped back from it, lowered the lights, and moved quietly to the side window where I could see the porch without being seen. The rain had picked up, streaking the glass, but I could still make out their silhouettes. 4 figures. Marcus, Elaine, Ethan, Chloe. All of them. They hadn't come separately. They hadn't called first. They hadn't even texted. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a visit. This was a move. I exhaled slowly and stepped away from the window. If they were here now, it meant one of 2 things. Either they had been monitoring the property sale closely, or they knew exactly what had been left behind long before I found it. Neither option worked in my favor. I walked back to the table and looked at the documents again, forcing myself to focus. Facts first. Emotion later. The clause I had found earlier wasn't ambiguous, not if you understood how to read it. It stated that the subsurface mineral rights remained conditionally attached to the surface owner unless explicitly transferred through a separate, properly executed agreement. No such agreement existed in the packet, meaning Harold Bennett had died without ever relinquishing that control. Meaning it had passed quietly legally to me. That part was clean. What wasn't clean was everything surrounding it. The prior negotiations, the incomplete transfers, the handwritten note with my father's name. Marcus hadn't just been interested in this land, he had tried to secure it, and failed. I picked up my phone and called Jason. He answered on the second ring. Riley. You okay? I need you to confirm something I said, keeping my voice low. If a conditional mineral clause like this was never formally transferred, no recorded assignment, no notarized addendum, then it stays with the surface owner, right? There was a pause on his end. I could hear him shifting, probably pulling up his laptop. In most cases, yes, he said. Unless there's a hidden agreement filed separately which would still need to be recorded to be enforceable. It's not there, I said. I've checked everything in the registry. Then it's yours, Jason replied. Why? What did you find? I glanced toward the door as another knock hit harder this time. Something my family clearly wants, I said. Another pause. Riley. What kind of something enough to make them show up in a storm with paperwork already prepared? That got his attention. Don't sign anything, he said immediately. I don't care what they say, don't sign anything tonight. And document everything. Conversations, offers, everything. I already am, I said, glancing at my phone. I had turned on voice recording the moment I saw them outside. Not out of paranoia, out of habit. Good, Jason said. And Riley, if they knew about this before you bought it, there's a chance they assumed you wouldn't catch it. Which means whatever they're bringing you is designed to move fast. I figured. Then slow it down, he said. That's your advantage. I ended the call. The knocking stopped. For a second, the silence was worse. Then Marcus's voice came through the door. "Riley, we know you're in there. Not raised. Not angry. Controlled." That was always how he operated when he thought he had leverage. I walked over and unlocked the door, but I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I said, "Why are you here?" There was a brief pause. Then Ethan answered, impatience already creeping into his tone. "Because you made a mistake," he said, "and we're here to fix it." Fix it. Not help. Not talk. Fix. I opened the door just enough to see them clearly. Rain soaked through their clothes, but none of them looked uncomfortable. They looked focused. Marcus stepped forward slightly. "We need to come inside," he said. "Then tell me why I replied." His jaw tightened just slightly. "Because this involves property you don't fully understand." I almost smiled at that. "Then explain it," I said. Elaine stepped in softer, more familiar. "Riley, honey, this isn't something you want to handle on your own. We've dealt with this kind of situation before. That part was true, just not in the way she meant. I'm doing fine so far," I said. "So start talking." Ethan exhaled sharply and held up the folder he'd been carrying. "There's a clause tied to that land," he said. "One that wasn't properly resolved. It's complicated, and if you keep it, it's going to turn into a legal mess." "I'm aware of the clause," I said. That caught him off guard. Not visibly, but enough. Marcus stepped in again, recalibrating. "Then you know it's better handled by someone with experience," he said. "Someone who already understands the structure behind it." "Meaning you," I said. "Meaning the family," he corrected. There it was. Not about protecting me, about consolidating control. "What exactly are you asking for?" I said. Ethan opened the folder and pulled out a set of documents. "A transfer agreement," he said. "You sign this, we take over the property, and you walk away with a clean payout." "How clean?" I asked. He named a number. It was higher than what I paid, but not even close to what the land was worth. Not if the map I had found was accurate. "Why the rush?" I asked. "No rush," Marcus said calmly. "We just don't want this to turn into something bigger than it needs to be." That was the closest he had come to the truth, because it was already bigger. They just didn't know how much I knew. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," I said. They entered without hesitation. Marcus took the seat at the table like he already owned it. Ethan laid out the documents. Elaine stood behind him watching me. Chloe stayed near the door, quiet but observant. I didn't sit down immediately. Instead, I walked over to the counter, picked up the papers they had brought, and started reading, line by line, clause by clause. They didn't interrupt, because they expected me to react, to hesitate, to feel overwhelmed. Instead, I kept reading, and within less than a minute, I found it. The trap. Buried in a subsection most people would skim past. A conditional waiver of future claims. If I signed this, I wouldn't just be transferring the property. I'd be giving up any right to challenge what came after. Even if they exploited the land for far more than they were offering me. Even if they had misrepresented the value. Even if they had known all along. I set the papers down slowly and looked up at them. "You didn't come here to help me," I said. Marcus didn't respond. Ethan did. "We came here to make sure this gets handled the right way." I held his gaze for a second longer. Then I said quietly, "No. You came here because you think I don't understand what I have." That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Because for the first time since they walked in, They weren't completely sure anymore. And that uncertainty, that was something I could use. The silence after I said that wasn't loud. It was controlled, carefully held in place by people who weren't used to being questioned. Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands like he was settling into a negotiation he expected to win. "You think you understand it?" he said. "That's not the same thing." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I sat down across from him and slid the contract back toward Ethan. "Walk me through it," I said. "Line by line." Ethan hesitated. That was the first real crack. Because if this was as simple as they claimed, he would have jumped at the chance to explain it, to prove I was wrong, to rush me into signing. Instead, he glanced at Marcus. Marcus gave a slight nod. "Fine," Ethan said, flipping the first page open. "This agreement transfers the property into a holding structure we manage. It protects the asset and allows us to resolve the outstanding issues tied to the land." Which issues, I asked. "Potential claims, prior interests. You don't want to deal with that." I asked which ones I repeated. He exhaled, impatient now. "It's not about specifics, Riley. It's about risk." "That's vague," I said calmly. "And vague doesn't hold up in court." Elaine stepped in softer. "Honey, this doesn't have to be adversarial. We're trying to keep things simple for you." I looked at her. "If it were simple, you wouldn't be here tonight." That shut her down. I flipped to the second page. That clause I said, tapping the section I had already flagged. "Explain the waiver of future claims." Ethan's jaw tightened. "It's standard." "No," I said. "It's not. It removes my right to challenge any valuation or subsequent agreement tied to the property after transfer. That's to prevent complications," he said quickly. "For who?" I asked. He didn't answer, because we both knew the answer. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his tone sharpening just enough to signal a shift. "You're focusing on technicalities," he said. "What matters is that this situation is bigger than you think." "I agree," I said. That caught him off guard. "For example, I continued the fact that you tried to acquire this property before and failed." Elaine froze. Chloe looked up. Ethan went still. Marcus didn't move, but something in his expression changed. "That's not relevant," he said. "It's exactly relevant," I replied, "because it explains why you're here now." I let that sit for a second before continuing. "You knew about the mineral clause," I said. "You knew it wasn't fully resolved, and you assumed whoever bought the property wouldn't catch it." "That's speculation," Ethan snapped. "No," I said. "It's pattern recognition." I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the documents I had found. Not all of them. Just enough. I placed them on the table. "Your name shows up here," I said, looking at Marcus. "Not as an owner. As a negotiator. You made an offer that Harold Bennett refused." Elaine's eyes flicked to Marcus. Ethan looked between us. Chloe shifted her weight but stayed silent. Marcus finally spoke. "That was years ago," he said, "and it didn't go anywhere, because he didn't trust the terms I said." Another pause. Not denial. Not confirmation. Just silence. I leaned back slightly. "You're not here to protect me," I said. "You're here to finish what you started." Ethan's patience snapped. "Do you have any idea what you're sitting on?" he said. "This isn't a small find, Riley. This is the kind of asset people fight over. Legally, financially, publicly." "I'm aware," I said. "No, you're not." He shot back. "Because if you were, you wouldn't be dragging this out. You'd be securing it before someone else challenges your claim." "That's interesting," I said. Because according to the registry, no one has challenged it. Yet he said, there it was. Not a threat. A pressure point. Marcus stepped in again, calmer. Listen, he said. We're not your enemies here. We're offering you a clean exit. Immediate liquidity. No exposure. Exposure to what I asked. To risk, he said. I nodded slowly. Then explain the valuation. Ethan blinked. What? The number you offered, I said. How did you arrive at it? It's fair, he said. That's not a calculation. It's above market for the structure. I'm not selling the structure, I said. That landed, because it forced the conversation back to what they were trying to avoid. The land. What was under it. Marcus's tone shifted again, less patient now. You're overestimating the value, he said. There are costs involved. Extraction permits, environmental assessments. I know, I said. I read the map. That stopped him. Completely. For just a second. But it was enough. Ethan looked at me sharply. What map, he asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I let the silence do the work. Because now they weren't just unsure about what I knew. They were worried. Elaine spoke again, softer, almost pleading. Riley, this doesn't have to become a conflict. We can handle this together. Like a family. I looked at her. Really looked. And for a moment I almost believed that part of her meant it. But intention doesn't erase pattern. You had years to include me, I said. You didn't. That was different, she said. How, I asked. No answer. Ethan pushed the contract slightly closer to me. Just sign it, he said. Take the money and walk away. You don't want what comes with this. I glanced down at the paper, then back at him. You're right, I said. Relief flickered across his face too fast to hide. You don't want what comes with this either, I continued. That wiped it away, because now the equation had changed. Not just what I knew, but what I was willing to do with it. I reached for the pen on the table, not to sign, just to hold, and in that moment every eye in the room locked onto it, because they still believed on some level that this could go their way, that I would fold, that I would choose the easy exit. I set the pen down, gently. I'm not signing this tonight, I said. Ethan exhaled sharply. That's a mistake. No, I said. Signing it would be. Marcus stood up slowly. Not angry, just done negotiating. For your sake, he said, I hope you understand what you're getting into. I do, I replied, and for the first time since they arrived, that wasn't a guess. It was a decision. Marcus nodded once, then turned toward the door. The others followed one by one. Ethan lingered just long enough to look back at me. This isn't over, he said. I met his gaze. I know, I said. He left. The door closed, and just like that, the cabin was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This one had weight, because now it wasn't just about what I had found, it was about what they were willing to do to get it. And as I stood there looking at the documents still spread across my table, one thought settled in clearly. If they came this prepared on the first night, then whatever came next wouldn't be subtle. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, because I was thinking. There's a difference. Fear makes you react. Thinking makes you plan. I sat at the table long after they left, replaying every word, every pause, every glance they exchanged when I mentioned the map. The way Ethan's confidence slipped. The way Marcus stopped talking entirely. That wasn't about surprise. That was about damage control, which meant one thing: they didn't expect me to find everything. Not this quickly. And that gave me a window. I organized the documents into 3 stacks. What I could prove, what I could infer, what I needed confirmed. The recording on my phone was still running. I stopped it, saved the file, and backed it up immediately twice. Once to a secure cloud folder, once to an external drive I kept in my bag. That habit had saved me more than once at work. It wasn't paranoia, it was procedure. I listened to a short segment of the recording, not all of it, just enough to confirm clarity. Every voice was identifiable. Every key statement was intact. Marcus acknowledging prior involvement. Ethan pushing the undervalued contract. Elaine reinforcing emotional pressure. It wasn't a courtroom-ready case yet. But it was leverage. I checked the time. 2:18 a.m. Then I looked at the map again. The annotations were precise, too precise to be speculative. Whoever had done this survey had either commissioned it privately or had access to data most buyers wouldn't see. That raised a new question. If Harold Bennett had this level of information, why didn't he act on it? The answer was probably buried in something I hadn't opened yet. I picked up the key. The number tag attached to it caught the light again. Simple. Unmarked except for that number. No brand, no location reference, just a number. Keys like that aren't for houses. They're for storage, or safety deposit boxes, or something designed to stay out of sight. I turned it over in my hand, thinking through the possibilities. Then I remembered something else. One of the documents had referenced a secondary holding location briefly, almost like a footnote. Not detailed, just mentioned in passing. At the time, I had moved past it. Now, it mattered. I went back through the papers slower this time, scanning for that reference again. It took me a few minutes to find it. A line in an older addendum. Supplemental materials secured separately under designated access. No location, no explanation. Just that. And the key in my hand suddenly felt less like a coincidence. I leaned back, connecting the pieces. If Harold had anticipated that someone would come after these rights, then he wouldn't leave everything in one place. He would split it, protect it, make it harder to take. Which meant what I had found under the floor wasn't the full picture. It was a warning and a pointer. I stood up and grabbed my laptop. There were only so many banks in the region that still issued physical keys with numbered tags like this. Smaller institutions, older systems, places that hadn't fully transitioned to digital access. I cross-referenced the number format with a few regional banks. It wasn't definitive, but one name kept coming up. A branch about 40 minutes away, small, local, established decades ago. The kind of place Harold Bennett would have used. I checked the time again. Too early, but not too early to prepare. I gathered the documents, the key, and the recording backups. Then I wrote a quick summary of everything I had found. Dates, names, clauses, connections. Not because I needed it. Because if something happened to me, someone else would. That's another habit from my job. You never assume you'll always be the one holding the information. By the time the sun started coming up, I had a plan. Go to the bank, verify the key, access whatever was stored there. Then bring everything to Angela. No shortcuts, no assumptions, just evidence. I stepped outside briefly, the air colder now, the storm gone. The trees looked different in daylight, less threatening, more neutral. But that didn't change what had already been set in motion. I locked the cabin carefully before leaving. Not because I thought someone would break in, because I knew they might try. The drive into town was quiet, too quiet for my thoughts. Every mile gave me more clarity and more questions. By the time I reached the bank, it had just opened. The building looked exactly like I expected. Modest, older, functional, no sign of anything unusual. I stepped inside. A single teller looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" I walked up to the counter and placed the key on the surface between us. "I'd like to access a safety deposit box," I said. She glanced at the key, then at me. "Do you have identification?" she asked. I handed it over. She checked it, then typed something into her system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her expression changed. Subtly, but enough. "I'll need to get the manager," she said. That was fast. Too fast. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. "Just a standard procedure." She stepped away. I stood there waiting, watching. The door behind the counter opened and a man in his 50s stepped out. Professional. Controlled. The kind of person who had handled complicated situations before. He approached slowly. "Ms. Robinson," he said. "Yes." He looked at the key, then back at me. "When did you come into possession of this?" he asked. "Recently," I said. "Why?" Another pause. Not hesitation. Calculation. Because he said carefully, "This box hasn't been accessed in over 10 years. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was what he said next. "And there's a note attached to it," he continued. "Left by the original owner." Something tightened in my chest. "What kind of note?" I asked. He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary, then said, "A conditional release." "A conditional release," I repeated. The manager gave a small nod, then gestured toward a private office behind the counter. "Let's discuss this somewhere more appropriate," he said. I followed him without hesitation. The room was simple desk, 2 chairs, no windows, the kind of space designed for conversations that weren't meant to be overheard. He closed the door behind us and sat down, folding his hands in front of him. "My name is Robert Hayes," he said. "I've been managing this branch for over 15 years. I was here when Mr. Bennett set this up." That mattered. "Then you know what's in the box," I said. "I know enough," he replied. "Not the contents themselves, but the conditions surrounding access." I placed the key on the desk between us. "And those conditions are?" I asked. He slid a folder from a drawer and opened it carefully. "Mr. Bennett left specific instructions," he said. "The contents of the safety deposit box are to be released only to the current legal owner of the property tied to the documentation inside, provided that owner has not entered into any transfer agreement regarding the land prior to access." I held his gaze. "I haven't signed anything," I said. He nodded once, like that confirmed what he needed. "Then you meet the primary condition," he said. "Primary." Which meant there were others. "What else?" I asked. He turned a page. "There's an additional clause," he said. "A written statement from the original owner requesting that the individual accessing the box acknowledge awareness of potential external pressure related to the contents." That sounded like Harold. He expected someone to come after it, I said. Mr. Hayes didn't respond directly. Instead, he said, he wanted to ensure that whoever accessed this was doing so knowingly, not under coercion, not under misinformation. I thought about my family, about the contract they had tried to push on me. "I'm not being coerced," I said. He studied me for a moment, then closed the folder. "Very well," he said. "I'll have the box brought out." He stood and left the room. I sat there alone, listening to the quiet hum of the building around me. This was the point where most people would feel something close to anticipation. I didn't. I felt alignment. Like everything I had uncovered so far was leading to something specific, something intentional. The door opened again a few minutes later. Mr. Hayes returned carrying a small metal box. Not large, but solid. He placed it on the desk and sat down across from me. "I'll need you to sign here," he said, sliding a document forward. I read it. Not skimmed. Read. Standard access acknowledgement with an added paragraph referencing the conditional release. No hidden language. No unexpected waivers. Clean. I signed. He unlocked the box with a master key, then stepped back. "I'll give you privacy," he said, moving toward the door. Before he left, he paused. "Mr. Bennett was very particular," he added. He didn't trust easily, but he believed in preparation. Then he stepped out. The door closed. And it was just me. And the box. I waited a second before opening it. Not out of hesitation, out of discipline. Then I lifted the lid. Inside, everything was arranged with the same deliberate care as the envelope under the floor. Nothing random, nothing excessive. Just what mattered. A second set of documents, more detailed than the ones I had found. Original agreements, drafts, correspondence, and a sealed packet labeled Final Valuation and Survey Confirmation. I set that aside for a moment and picked up the documents. These weren't copies, they were originals. Signed. Dated. Some of them incomplete intentionally. Harold hadn't just refused offers, he had documented them. Every proposal, every revision, every attempt to restructure the terms in ways that shifted control without making it obvious. And Marcus Robinson's name appeared again, more clearly this time, not just in notes, in formal drafts. He had been closer to securing this than I realized, which meant his failure wasn't accidental. It was forced. I flipped to a letter clipped to one of the agreements. Not handwritten this time. Typed. Addressed directly to Harold. The sender's name was partially obscured, but the language was familiar, structured, persuasive, built to sound reasonable while hiding its intent. Offer after offer, each one increasing in value, each one tightening the terms just enough to tip control away from the landowner. I set it down, then reached for the sealed packet. Final Valuation and Survey Confirmation. I broke the seal. Inside was a detailed report. Not speculative. Verified. Backed by geological analysis, extraction estimates, and projected market value. I didn't need to read every page to understand what it meant, but I did anyway, because numbers matter. And these numbers weren't small. They weren't even moderate. They were significant, enough to explain everything. The offers, the pressure, the persistence. The reason Harold had refused to sell, and the reason my family had shown up at my door without warning. I closed the report slowly, because now the situation wasn't just clear, it was undeniable. They hadn't underestimated me by accident. They had counted on it, counted on me being exactly who they thought I was. Careful, quiet, easy to dismiss, and easy to outmaneuver. I looked back at the rest of the contents. There was one more item. A smaller envelope. Thinner than the others. Labeled simply, "For the next owner." I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. If you're reading this, then you've already done what most wouldn't you looked deeper. I exhaled quietly. Don't rush to act. They will. That's how they make mistakes. That line stayed with me. They'll try to make you feel unprepared. You're not. You just need to stay patient long enough for the truth to surface. I folded the letter carefully, because that was the difference now. Not just what I knew, but how I used it. I gathered everything back into the box, leaving nothing behind. When I stepped out of the office, Mr. Hayes was waiting. All set, he asked. Yes, I said. He nodded. Then whatever comes next, he said, make sure it's on your terms. I met his gaze. It will be. And as I walked out of that bank, one thing was already decided. I wasn't going to react to what my family had tried to do. I was going to let them think they still had a chance, because the moment they pushed again, I'd be ready. By the time I got back to the cabin, the road was dry, but nothing else was. Not the situation, not the tension, not the way everything had shifted. I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I stood on the porch for a moment, looking out at the trees, letting the quiet settle back in. It wasn't peaceful. It was steady, predictable. And right now, that was enough. Because inside, nothing about this was predictable anymore. I stepped in, locked the door behind me, and set the metal box on the table. Then I called Angela Brooks. She answered immediately. Riley. I have everything I said. Original documents valuation report, recorded conversation. It's complete. There was a brief silence on her end. Then we move carefully, she said. What do you want to do? I looked down at the box, at the proof of everything they had tried to hide. Set up a meeting, I said. I want them all there. Your family, she asked. Yes, but not alone. I want you present on record. Another pause. You're sure, she said. This won't stay quiet? It was never going to, I replied. All right, she said. I'll prepare everything. We ended the call. I didn't spend the rest of the day reviewing documents again. I already knew what I had. What mattered now was timing. They expected pressure to work. They expected hesitation. They expected me to come back to them, so I didn't. I waited. And 2 days later, just like I knew they would, they called. Ethan. I let it ring twice before answering. Riley, he said. Have you thought about it? Yes, I said. I have. A brief pause, and he asked. I'm willing to talk, I said, but not here, not like last time. What do you mean? I mean we do this properly, I said, with legal representation, with everything on record. Silence, not confusion, calculation. That's not necessary, he said finally. It is for me, I replied. If you're confident in what you're offering, it shouldn't be a problem. Another pause. Then fine, he said. Set it up. I gave him the time and date. He agreed. Too quickly, which told me he still believed he could control the outcome. That was fine. Let him. The meeting took place at the cabin, neutral ground, or at least ground they thought they could still claim. I had Angela on a secured video call displayed on my laptop at the head of the table. When my family walked in, their expressions shifted the moment they saw her. Not dramatically, but enough. Let's sit, I said. No one argued. Marcus took his usual seat. Ethan opened his folder again. Elaine stayed quiet. Chloe watched everything. Angela introduced herself calmly. This conversation is being documented, she said. Proceed accordingly. That changed the room, subtly, but permanently. Ethan started first. "We're here to finalize the transfer," he said. Riley has had time to consider. "No," I interrupted. "I'm here to clarify something I said." I slid a copy of the valuation report across the table. "Not the original." "A copy." Ethan looked down at it, then froze. Marcus leaned forward. Elaine's hand tightened slightly against the table. "Where did you get this?" Ethan asked. "That doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is that it's accurate." Angela's voice came through clearly. "We verified the report independently," she said. "The figures are consistent with current market projections." Ethan didn't respond. Marcus did. "That's one report," he said. "Valuations fluctuate." "So does trust," I said. That stopped him. I reached for my phone, then pressed play. The recording filled the room. Marcus's voice, Ethan's, Elaine's, every word from that night. Clear, undeniable. The pressure, the intent, the omissions. Chloe looked at her parents, not shocked, just seeing something differently. I stopped the recording. Silence followed. Not the controlled kind, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to shape. Angela spoke again. Based on this evidence, she said any attempt to pressure Ms. Robinson into signing a transfer agreement could be interpreted as coercion. Ethan finally snapped. "This is ridiculous," he said. "We were trying to help her." "No," I said. "You were trying to close something you couldn't before." Marcus stood up. Slow. Measured. "You're making this adversarial," he said. "It already was," I replied. I leaned forward slightly. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. They didn't interrupt. Because now they understood this wasn't a negotiation anymore. "This property stays with me," I said. "All rights. Surface and subsurface." Ethan opened his mouth. I didn't let him speak. "You don't contact me about it again," I continued. "Not directly. Not through anyone else." Elaine's voice broke in softer now. "Riley, we're your family." I looked at her. "I know I said, that's why I'm setting this boundary clearly." Marcus's expression hardened. "And if we don't agree?" he asked. Angela answered that one. "Then any further attempts to interfere will be addressed legally," she said. "We're fully prepared to proceed if necessary." That landed, because they knew she meant it. Because now, it wasn't just me. I stood up. "That's my condition," I said. "You walk away from this, completely." Ethan looked at Marcus. Marcus didn't respond. Not immediately. Then finally, he nodded. Once. Not agreement. Acceptance. "We're done here," he said. They left without another word. No argument. No last attempt. Because there was nothing left to push. The door closed behind them. And just like that, the power had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. And as I stood there looking at the table where everything had just played out, I realized something. They hadn't lost because I outpowered them. They lost because I understood them. And this time I didn't let them define the terms. Fan Mui. The first thing I did after they left wasn't celebrate. It was change the locks, not out of fear, out of clarity. Control isn't about reacting to what might happen. It's about removing the need to react at all. I replaced every exterior lock the next morning, installed a simple security system, and documented everything: timestamps, receipts, footage, access. Not because I expected them to come back. because if they did, I wanted it recorded. Angela helped finalize the legal protections within the week. We filed a formal notice affirming sole ownership of both surface and subsurface rights backed by the original documents and the valuation report. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't retaliatory. It was precise, clear, and enforceable. After that, things quieted down. Marcus didn't call. Elaine sent one message, short, carefully worded, asking if we could talk as a family. I didn't respond. Ethan stayed silent. Chloe sent nothing at all. At first, the silence felt strange. Then it felt necessary, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for their approval, or their reaction, or their version of what I should do next. I drove back to the bank 2 weeks later and finalized a separate agreement, this time with a legitimate resource company, one that worked through transparent contracts and third-party audits. No rushed timelines, no hidden clauses. Everything explained, everything documented. The deal wasn't about immediate extraction. It was about structured development, measured, regulated, and under my control. I kept majority rights. That part mattered, not just financially, but psychologically, because this wasn't just about what was under the land. It was about not losing control of it again. Back at the cabin, I started making small changes. Nothing dramatic. A new desk by the window, better lighting in the living room, repairs where the structure needed it, not to modernize, but to stabilize. I left the floorboard intact, reinforced, not hidden anymore, just respected. Sometimes I would sit there in the evening reading through the original letter Harold Bennett had left behind, not because I needed the information, because I understood the intention now. He hadn't just been protecting the land. He had been protecting the truth long enough for someone else to see it clearly, and for once, that someone had been me. A month later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside, just a single sheet. From Marcus? No apology. No explanation. Just one sentence. You always were more observant than we gave you credit for. I read it once, then folded it and placed it back in the envelope. Not as closure, as confirmation, because recognition doesn't erase what came before it, and it doesn't automatically reopen doors. That part is a choice. I didn't reach out. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, out of understanding. Some relationships don't end because of one moment. They end because of a pattern you finally decide not to continue. The cabin didn't feel like an escape anymore. It felt like a foundation, not just for what it could become, but for what I had already decided, what I allow, what I don't, what I keep, and what I walk away from. And for the first time, none of those decisions felt uncertain. They felt earned. Some people think the hardest part of situations like this is the betrayal. It isn't. It's the moment you realize you've been adjusting yourself to fit someone else's expectations for so long that you forgot you were allowed to choose differently. I didn't win because I was lucky. I won because I paid attention, because I slowed down when others rushed, because I read what wasn't explained, and because I didn't let pressure replace clarity. If you've ever been in a position where family or anyone close to you used guilt or urgency to push you into a decision, you know how hard it is to step back and ask the right questions. Setting boundaries isn't revenge. It's structure, and forgiveness doesn't mean restoring access to people who misuse it. It just means you're no longer carrying what they did forward. If this story resonated with you, I'd really like to hear where you're watching from and what time it is there. It always reminds me how many different lives intersect in moments like this. And if you want more stories like this, ones that explore what happens when people stop accepting what they've been told they deserve, you're welcome to stay. This is a fictional story created for entertainment, education, and reflection.